My name is Emily Utsler, and my research proposal has to do with students with an autism spectrum disorder and their full inclusion in a general education setting. Today, students with disabilities and their parents are advocating for full inclusion of children with mild to moderate needs in the general education setting full-time. This research proposal will be focusing on students who have autism spectrum disorders, their inclusion in the general education setting, and how it affects their academic progress and social skills. Depending on the severity and functionality of the ASD in the student will receive special education services or be placed in a non-public school, henceforth a program specifically for students with an ASD that tailors curriculum to meet that child's needs. These programs are small, only consist of students with ASDs, and can have a 1-to-1 ratio of teacher to student. Under Part B of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act signed in 2004, the least restrictive environment requirements state that a student with a disability must be integrated and educated with their non-disabled peers as much as possible. The purpose of this research proposal is to explore the following research question. Does placing a student with an autism spectrum disorder in a non-public school negatively affect their academic and social progress? This research is important because there is a lack of general education teacher training to successfully use teaching methods for students with mild to moderate needs in their classrooms. There's also a lack of paraprofessional support offered in general education classrooms, making it hard to meet the needs of students with disabilities that may be in the class. There are resources and funding that can be advocated for now to get the general education teachers the trainings they need, as well as to get the paraprofessional support that some students might require in order to update the current studies. Studies have been done to see if placing students with a mild to moderate ASD in a general education setting would positively affect their academic and social progress, but these studies are over 5 years old. Updating the current studies can help educators learn if a more cohesive environment between typically developing children, general education teachers, administration, and students with disabilities can be created. Of the studies that have been conducted, positive correlation has been found between full inclusion for students with ASDs and their social and academic progress. Lauderdale-Litton et al. Used a list of tools to examine social and behavioral characteristics of students with an ASD, and they found students in a public school exhibited higher levels of social skills. Another study, conducted by Susan et al., discovered that children with an ASD who spent most of their time in a special education classroom displayed lower IQs and more severe symptoms associated with their ASD. In yet another study by Elder et al., 37 inclusion coordinators gave bi-monthly reports, a comprehensive report, and an open interview after spending a year integrating children with ASDs into the general education setting. They concluded that the behavior of children with autism is more social when among typical children than among other children with autism. For the experimental setup, 20 students will be selected to participate, 10 from a non-public school that specifically serves children with ASDs, and 10 from a large suburban school district. Students are middle grade, aged 11 to 14 years, and all have an autism spectrum disorder. The proposed sampling techniques are convenience sampling and simple random sampling. Convenience sampling because what was chosen was what was readily available. Simple random sampling was chosen because there is no specific trait we're looking for other than the student having an ASD. 3 measurement instruments are being used: the Behavior Assessment System for Children, 3rd edition, or the BASC3, the Kaufman Test of Educational Achievement, 3rd edition, or the KTEA3, and a researcher-made survey for students and for teachers. One of the threats to reliability to the instruments is the subjects themselves. Students with ASDs often have behaviors that can be unexpected and unpredictable. There is a possibility of inconsistency from the pretest to the post-tests. The teachers and parents need to be made aware that they need to keep the students' collective behavior and actions in mind over the course of the semester. The BASC3 is a comprehensive set of rating scales and forms that help parents and teachers understand behaviors and emotions of adolescents. Responses for the BASC3 are measured in fixed answers, never, sometimes, almost always, or often, on all of the scales, including teacher report, parent report, and self-report. There are 28 statements in the self-report form, while the parent and teacher report form has 175 statements. The BASC3 includes validity indexes, the F index, the V index, the L index, and the consistency index in order to measure consistency across the scores. These indexes have been rated as acceptable, and even still revisions continue to be made to the test to make sure it remains consistent and valid. The KTEA3 is a comprehensive assessment of key academic skills that only the teacher fills out because they are the ones doing the assessment. The KTEA3 can measure not only academic skill, but progress in response to intervention as well. For purposes of the research proposal, only the academic skills battery composite section will be used, which tests math skills, reading skills, oral skills, and writing skills. After the child completes the tests, they are numerically rated and placed in a graph to show how high or low the score was. The KTEA3 has been measured against other tests that measure these academic skills, and strong positive correlation has been found, indicating that the KTEA3 is a good indicator of what it's measuring. The third measurement instrument are 2 researcher-made surveys. The survey for the teachers is 10 questions long. They are measured in fixed responses with the choices being yes, no, or not available. Teachers will be discouraged from choosing not available, but the option needs to be there if it applies to any one student or an option for a particular student. The student survey is also 10 questions long. They are measured in fixed responses with the choices being either yes or no. The purpose of these surveys is to get 2 different points of views for the specific academic goals and socialization within the classroom, and to see if it will change at all during the semester. The researcher-made survey could pose a threat because the questions on it may not be specific enough, or they're not asking the right questions intended for the experiment. The researcher-made survey is the hardest to control the validity of, but if it is revised in regards to the experiment to be more specific once the subjects are selected, then it would diminish that threat as much as it could. This is classified as a quasi-experimental design because the subjects are already in preset groups. The change that is being introduced to the experimental group is taking them from the special education setting and placing them into a general education setting 100% of the time for 1 semester. These students will receive constant paraprofessional support, and they will be placed with teachers who have received training on methods to teach students with ASDs. The control group will remain in their non-public school program with no changes made. Prior to the beginning of the experiment, teachers, parents, and students from both groups will be asked to complete the BASC3 using the response forms to measure social skills and other necessary traits. In addition, teachers from both groups will be asked to assess students' academic level in math, reading, writing, and oral language using the KTEA3. Finally, teachers and students from both groups will be asked to fill out a researcher-made survey. The experiment will then last 1 semester with controlled observation for both groups at random times throughout the semester. At the end of the semester, teachers, parents, and students from both groups will be asked once again to complete the BASC3. Teachers from both groups will once again assess students' academic levels using the KTEA3. Finally, teachers and students from both groups will complete the same researcher-made surveys. Social progress will consider to have been made if there is a significant positive growth in the adaptive skills section of the BASC3. Academic progress will be considered to have been made if there is a significant positive increase on the various sections of the KTEA3. Significant does not necessarily have to mean great, just significant for what is expected of that individual child. 4 internal threats to validity have been detected. It will not be known what is going on at home or in other environments the students are in during the course of the semester. In both groups, the parents can be kept up to date about how their child is doing and asked to let the experimenters know if anything has happened at home that would affect the behavior and actions of their child during school. The teachers can be asked to keep these factors in mind while completing the pre-tests and the post-tests. Children with ASDs, especially at this age, can have changes in behavior drastically from day to day. It's very much possible that major changes can occur throughout the semester. Teachers and parents can be reminded to look at behavior collectively. Since the subjects from each group cannot be randomly assigned, they'll all have different characteristics about them that would affect the groups they're already in. However, this would ring true anyway because all children who have an ASD are vastly different from each other. By keeping the same age range for both groups, however, the threat should be somewhat balanced out. The experimental group will know that they are being tested because of their new placement in the general education setting. It's possible they'll have a renewed effort or a regressed effort in regards to their schoolwork and their socialization with their classmates. Since observation will be in place for both groups at random times during the semester, and the students will have paraprofessional support, preferably from paras who are already familiar with the child, any significant changes can be determined to either be random or because of the study they're participating in. Two threats to the external validity of the experiment have been detected. Because of pretest treatment interaction, the teachers, parents, and students completing the pretests will know what to look for as far as changes go during the semester, but this also serves as the solution. The adults will know what changes to look for in regards to the experiment. Since the experimental group will have paraprofessional support with them at all times, and the students in the non-public school will have a 1-to-1 ratio of teachers to students, it would be possible to give the students cues where they shouldn't be given cues. Clear instructions need to be set up at the beginning of the experiment as to how to help the students in the classroom so that if their social and academic progress changes, it's not because of the para or teacher support. The threat of any unintended or unconscious cues will be lowered. The following are the research hypotheses. Placing students with an ASD into the general education setting full-time will show significant growth in their social and academic skills. Keeping students with an ASD in a non-public school program will negatively impact growth in social and academic skills. The following are the corresponding null hypotheses. There is no relationship between positive academic and social growth and the student being placed in the general education setting full-time. There is no relationship between negative academic and social growth and the student being kept in a non-public school program. The following steps of analyses for the scores of the pretest and post-tests would be considered ex post facto because the groups were based on qualities, having an ASD, that already exists in the subjects, and the experiment is seeing how that quality affects the learning and social skills of the subjects. The z-scores of the BASC3 can be converted into t-scores for each of the 20 students, so that they're easier to graph as positive whole numbers. The mean for each categorical score will be taken and then plotted onto a line graph. There will be two separate lines, one for the control group and one for the experimental group, to clearly show any differences, positive or negative, between the two. This analysis will be done for the pretests and the post-tests. The z-scores of the KTEA3 can be converted into t-scores for each of the 20 students. The mean from each categorical group will be taken and placed into a double bar graph. One bar for the experimental group and one for the control group to clearly show any differences, positive or negative, between the two. This analysis will be done for the pretests and the post-tests. The standard deviation will be measured to see how close all of the scores are to the mean or to see if they're more spread out. Two different t-tests will be conducted on the two group scores, a paired sample t-test and an independent sample t-test. To perform the paired sample t-test, the scores from the BASC3 pretest and post-test and the KTEA3 pretest and post-test for the experimental group will be taken and compared to each other, while the scores from the BASC3 pretest and post-test and the KTEA3 pretest and post-test for the control group will be taken and compared to each other. They will be compared on a separate level first to see if there were any changes between the two for each group. To perform the independent sample t-test, the scores from the BASC3 pretest and post-test for the experimental group and the control group will be analyzed to note any significant differences that occurred. The scores from the KTEA3 pretest and post-test for the experimental group and the control group will be analyzed to note any significant differences that occurred. The independent sample t-test looks to compare the two groups' scores to each other and see any positive or negative differences between the two. If there is statistical evidence to prove that there is a significant positive difference between the pretest and post-test for the experimental group and no significant difference for the control group, and if the means from the experimental group prove to be higher than those of the control group, it will contribute to the hypothesis that placing students with an ASD in the general education setting full-time will only progress them further academically and socially.